Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's event from the Jesus College Intellectual Forum. I'm Julian Huppard. I have the great pleasure to be the director of the Intellectual Forum. It's lovely to have you here, whether you're in this wonderful Frankopan hall or you're watching us online. I think we have a number of people from the west coast of the US and many, many other countries in the world. It's great to have you here. Some of you will know Jesus College very well. For those who don't, can I just say a couple of words about our history, because I think it's quite amazing. In 1144, we were set up as a nunnery. A small group of itinerant nuns were given a little plot of land by Nigel, Bishop of Ely. That was then expanded by King Malcolm of Scotland. Yes, for some reason, the King of Scotland owned all of this area around Cambridge. And we continued as a nunnery until 1496, when the new Bishop of Ely came to see how things were going. He said there were two nuns left. One of them was rather elderly, and the other was of ill fame, which you can interpret however you like. But nonetheless, he decided to kick the women out and turn it into an all-male college, something we fixed just over 4 decades ago. And during that time, there have been many wonderful people who have thought about things, worked here, and made a difference to the world, giving us a real window into how a world could be. People from Archbishop Cranmer, who set up the Church of England and the Book of Common Prayer, Malthus, who spoke about population, Lisa Jardine, our first female fellow, and an absolutely astonishing person in both Renaissance English and running the Human Fertilization Embryology Authority, showing you can combine a huge range of different things. We were set up more recently to try to get people to think and talk about interesting and important things, to learn and reflect. And it's a huge pleasure to have an absolutely star speaker with us tonight as part of that. Meredith O'Shaughnessy, as you will see, has a phenomenal background. Now, it started off, if I go back in the family history, with 10 convicts in the family. And I think that was a couple of generations ago. Yes, she, like me, is an Australian. And she's done many things over those years. Now, she's trained and studied engineering, particularly material science, but has had an absolutely amazing career changing that in terms of now working with huge numbers of brands. She's an experiential architect, somebody who thinks about how we experience, what stories we tell ourselves and what we can learn, as you're going to see very shortly. She's worked with some amazing organizations and brands, Microsoft, Unilever, various drinks agencies, a huge, huge range. She was one of the pioneers of the avocado craze in London, and you can still see pictures of her in a huge swimming pool, I think, of avocados. Do come on in. I'm really excited to have Meredith here to learn how we do tell stories and how we can use some of the images and some of the ideas to tell absolutely fantastic stories. Meredith, thank you so much for being here. It's lovely to have you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Wow. Lovely to meet you all. Thank you so much. What an introduction. It is true about the avocado picture, by the way. You can still find that where I'm lying in 400 avocados. I won't be talking about avocados this evening, but what I will be talking about is immersive experiences and how we can use them to change the stories. Now, I've just realized my mic's kind of spitting slightly, so I'm going to try and sort that out. What we're going to start off here is we're going to start off with a quote, which hopefully is going to go if my clicker works. Here we go. Yes, magic. The world is full of magic, things patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper. It's this that I want you to hold on to today. In fact, this is all you need to know. You can all go home now. That's it, really. I just want to talk to you about magic today. And I also want to talk to you about an industry which is growing, secretly growing, which people don't talk about enough. It's actually our fastest growing creative industry here in the UK. And the UK is the world leader at it. How many times do we get to hear that we are the world leader at something? And this industry is actually contributing a huge amount to our economy. People aren't talking about it enough. They're not talking about the practitioners. They're not talking about the type of work they're doing. But it's actually contributing 108 billion to the UK economy at the moment, and it's growing rapidly. So it is something we need to be talking to and paying attention to at the moment. And actually, when we think about the global immersive market, it is estimated to be at 420 billion, around that, by 2030. So we really are talking about a significant industry here. In 1999, two gentlemen wrote a book called The Experience Economy. This seminal book, people like us who work in the industry actually use this quote. And actually what they were talking about in the experience economy is they were talking about how the world would be moving from economy which was dedicated to services and products to one that was about experiences. Now, this is good for all of us because actually we need to be buying fewer things, we need to be using less stuff. But actually, if we want economies to grow, what can we utilize? We can utilize experiences. So what I want to be talking to you about today is actually who is working in this economy, how is it growing, and what does the future look like? As Julia mentioned, I started off being an engineer. I like building things. I like seeing how things are put together. I like seeing how things are made. I started off doing material science, but much to my parents' horror, I dropped out of material science and engineering, and I started working in nightclubs. Now, I could have gone off and I could have gone and done a psychology degree to understand how people work and how they think and how their minds, what they want, what they desire, how they're driven emotionally. But I didn't. I went and worked in nightclubs for 10 years. And I tell you, if you want to understand what people really want in life, you'll find out at 3 o'clock in the 3 a.m. on a dance floor, because they will let you know. These nightclubs, they're these created worlds. You create rules, these arbitrary rules. Where can you sit? Where can you go? Who can come in? You have this desire. How much money will people pay every single weekend to come back time and time again to do something they truly love? You could genuinely learn about people's emotions and what drives them by working in an environment like this. And so after about 10 years of working in clubs, I decided I was going to set up my own company. And I wanted to take this idea, this engineering idea, the practicality of how something was created, and combine it with my knowledge of people, knowledge of desire. And I met this man here. Now, this is Tom Wolfe. Tom Wolfe is an incredible chef. He creates all this artistic food around the time that Heston Blumenthal was creating amazing dishes, where he was thinking about how he could use food as art, use food as a way of communicating. And what Tom did was he was actually commissioned by the British Council to launch this statue here, which is the statue of Yuri Gagarin. Some of you may recognize it, which is on the Mall. And during this launch that was commissioned by the British Council, we were going to have a live feed down from the cosmonaut station. Now, anybody that's run events before, that should give you horror to your soul, the technical issues that might happen with an event like that. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to think about a way that we could connect the cosmonauts and the experience of the cosmonauts with the people that were attending the launch of this statue, which was on this open terrace. And we were going to have ambassadors and various important people that were going to come. And I have to say, probably not the most fun crowd were coming down. So how could we inject a little bit of delight and joy into this experience? And what Tom did was he created this food. So this was an idea of what space food might be like. So these were the canapes that were served at this event. And he created this incredible food, including the cosmos, which you can see here. Now you look at it and you want to taste this, don't you? You want to try it, you want to see what it tastes like, but also it gives you a sense of, while it's not a replica of what's happening in the space station, it gives you a sense of the joy or the uniqueness of living in that sort of environment. And this was one of the first examples where I really experienced how you could use tiny little touch points inside experiences to tell a story. So after doing this event, I was thinking about laundrettes. I really love the mundane. I love things which are not necessarily the glitziest, and I have gone on to work with a lot of luxury brands, but I really was thinking about laundrettes and how I was really sparked by this idea of creating an event in a laundrette. And the idea that I had for this event that I wanted to create was I had the idea that we would have a dinner table in a laundrette, and you would come, you'd buy a ticket, you'd come to this dinner, and there would be a woman who was there, and you wouldn't know if she was a guest or an actress, and she would get drunker and drunker and drunker as this meal went on, and you can imagine in this small space. And she would stand up, and at one point she would air a confession. And she would then go around the table after she'd aired her confession. She'd get everybody else to air a confession. And when they aired their confession, you would then be able to all write what you'd said. You'd write your sin, and you'd then be able to wash away your sins in the washing machines. And I just thought this was a really fun idea. I was like, who doesn't want to go to an event like that? But it also harks back to this idea of these early experiences, this idea of a ritual. This idea of how can we use rituals to learn more about ourselves and each other. Now, a lot of experiences that are created, still to this day, even with this growing economy, are actually instigated by individuals and artists, people who have an idea like that, and they go and they try and make it happen, whether they get funding or whether they go to a large organization to try and get some money. So I was actually in talks with Whirlpool at the time. Now, Whirlpool, I was talking about something else, and I went to them and I said, I have an idea for an event, and I need a load of washing machines. And I thought they were going to say, no, we're not going to work with you on this. But actually what they did is they said, we do have a machine that we're about to launch, and it's the quietest machine on the market. And this machine has a very, very quiet spin cycle. Can you make that interesting? I was like, yeah, let's do it. I love a challenge. Let's see if I can try and make this washing machine interesting. And so I thought again about stories, these stories we tell, the experiences we have. And I thought rather than putting a machine in the corner of the room and saying it's really quiet, what if we build an experience around this machine? What if we build an event around this machine? And people can tell it's really quiet because the machine's working while they're out partying, while they're having an event. So I hired an art gallery in central London, and for 5 days I opened up Dirty Laundry. And this is me. This is actually me in an actual laundrette. This was the promo shots that we took. This was operational. This is actually people's washing behind me. I was lifting up my legs as they were still putting their washing into the machine while this picture was being taken. And we went out to press. Now, one of the things that Whirlpool was trying to do is they were trying to premiumtize their washing machines at the time. It was a very expensive machine. And trying to get a washing machine into vogue is quite hard, it turns out. Not so hard if you build an experience around it. So we opened up Dirty Laundry, and if you bought a ticket during that balmy summer in 2015, you would find Lucy at the door, and she would check you in on this vintage ironing board that we had. And then we had Senorina Bubbles here, and we created a narrative for her, and Senorina Bubbles would go around and she'd talk to people, and she would get them to air their confessions. And they would actually tell Senorina Bubbles all sorts of crazy things. I was constantly shocked. And this we probably wouldn't be allowed to do now, but this is her squirting alcohol into somebody's face. It's not cleaning products, I promise you. So we made all the food and drinks. We used special packaging around it. We had cards made up so we could use social media to try and promote the event, using the really kind of play on words, and people could sign up on Instagram, and back then it was Twitter. We don't talk about it anymore. And as you can see, it got into the Standard, it got into Vogue, it got into Elle. It was a real hit. But the thing that we did that really took this event over the edge is we converted washing machines into cocktail makers. So this DJ booth. So we converted washing machines into cocktail makers. And this gave this story a real edge, because people will always remember if they've had a cocktail out of a washing machine. And it was just so much fun. And Whirlpool were delighted. Not only have they managed to get into Vogue, not only was everyone talking about their washing machines, but one of the biggest challenges they had is they'd been really trying to get into John Lewis onto the shop floor. Now, anybody who works in the white goods industry would know that actually it's really hard to get those placements. It's really difficult. You have to show John Lewis that you have you're going to be able to attract the right customer, that people are going to come in and they're going to seek out your machine. All the buyers for John Lewis came down to this event, and they walked through the doors and they went, That's it. You're on the floor, because we can see that you're being innovative. We can see that you're taking a chance. We can see that you're trying to attract the customer that we want to attract to this event. So Dirty Laundry, by all metrics, was a success. It was also not completely funded by Whirlpool, I might add. I funded it. So I found the money to make that happen, and we raised ticket sales because I believed in this event and I wanted it to exist in the world. So a lot of the experiences that are being created now are actually being created by people who are trying to self-fund, who are trying to bring things to life. So it is a combination. It isn't just a commercial enterprise for a lot of people. It is art for a lot of people. So the thing I learned about this is don't tell people what your product can do. Don't tell people what it is. Let them feel it. Let them come down. Let them experience it. Because when people feel something, they remember it. It's different from being told. Don't force people into understanding something. Let them experience it for themselves. So I went on after I did Dirty Laundry. This is a second activation I did with Whirlpool. They found more money, which was very helpful. And I created something called Keeping Up with the Joneses, where they were launching a whole range of white goods. And I had a bigger selection of people that I hired who created a family, the Jones family. I had Mr. Jones in a bathtub giving away gym toothpaste. These are people in a giant dishwasher eating a macaron in the shape of a dishwasher tablet out of a dishwasher. There was pillow fights. There was all sorts of mad things. I wanted micro pigs. They wouldn't let me have them. I still am upset about that to this day. They weren't not sure it's our demographic. I was like, everyone loves a micro pig. So we did that with Whirlpool. This is a walnut grove that I created for California walnuts. This was in an attic in Shoreditch. So we flew over some Michelin-star chefs, and they sat in this walnut grove, and they had a meal that entirely contained walnuts. Every single dish had walnuts in it. And the setting went from day to night. So you came in, it was December, it was really cold outside. You walked through the doors, and it felt like this warm, welcoming environment, and the lights changed from day to night. As we sat there, we put candles on the table, and we had the sound of cicadas coming through the sound system in the evening. This is the Savoy Hotel, where I love trees, so there'll be a lot of trees in this. And I created an immersive champagne forest in the lobby of the Savoy Hotel. We had 2,000 paper fairies that were exclusively designed for us, in like modern fairies, or young fairies with afros, and little boy fairies that were all laser cut out of paper. It's my dog that features quite heavily in a lot of the stuff that I do, Phoebe. We had a whole theme around books, and we created a poem which was all about this idea of somebody that came to Savoy and took too much absinthe and had this fantastical evening at the Savoy Hotel. And as you can see, it was featured in Forbes, and it was featured around the world, and people were talking about it. So what I want to talk to you today is I want to talk to you about creating things of value. Things that people care about, things that people want to come to. But I'm not going to explain to you exactly how to create an immersive experience. I'm not expecting everyone in this room to go away and do it themselves. What I want to be talking to you is I want to be talking to you about an immersive mindset. How can we apply, everybody in this room, when you're trying to talk about something, when you're trying to communicate something, could you do it in an immersive way? Or could you speak to somebody that is doing it in an immersive way? And just add this to your bow when you're trying to communicate, when you're trying to tell stories. So this is what we're going to be discussing today. What makes something immersive? What's the difference between an experience and an immersive experience? So this is something that we debate quite heavily, actually within the community, within the immersive experience community, because we feel there's a lot of people that are quite serious about it, and I think the word immersive has been bandied around, and you now have immersive headphones and immersive cars and immersive, it's a word that is everywhere. And a lot of times when people think about immersive, what they're thinking about is they're thinking about this. They're thinking about the 5 senses. I mean, there's 7 if you want to add them all up. But they're thinking about the 5 senses, and they're thinking, if we put some scent into a room, is that an immersive experience? If we make something so that you can touch it, does that make it more immersive? Well, I would say no. And actually, a really good friend of mine and an incredible immersive experience producer, Sheena Patel, has a different way of looking at something being immersive. And it's this. To make something immersive, you need to have 3 main components. You need to have the design of an environment. So you need to have a space that is designed in some way. A college is designed. It's designed for communication. You have quads so that you can meet each other. The way that you have dinners here with the long tables and you can sit next to somebody that you might not have met before. You can ask them what they're working on. That is a designed environment. Designed environments can be a city. They don't have to be a small room. They can be a large space, but they are designed, and they are designed with a purpose in mind. The second thing you need is you need to have a story or a narrative. You need to have something that you're trying to tell. It can be more than one story, but there needs to be a story that you're trying to tell. And the third element you need to have is you need to have a reason for the person who is attending. They need to know what they're doing there. They need to have a reason to care. They need to have something to do. It is this final element which I believe is the most important thing, because what we're talking about is human-centric design. We're talking about creating things that people want to go to, that emotionally connect with them, and that mean something to people. And when you give people a reason to care or something to do in a space, it becomes their space. And this leads to agency. So the last element that people would think potentially suggest is autonomy in a space. So basically what that means, when you have autonomy or agency in space, you can affect that space. So what you do creates a change within that space. When you run something like dirty laundry, I promise you have no control over those people that are in there after 3 cocktails in from that washing machine. And you need to have people that are able to adapt to that. If you're going to create a theatrical immersive space or anything, if you're going to do VR, you need to know how the space is going to react to those people, and you need to account for that. So when you put it all together, I would say you have these 3 pillars here, and then on top of that, you overlay your sensors, because these will enhance your experience. Now, depending on what you're trying to design, I do a lot of work with brands, I probably won't be designing a lot of things that are highly theatrical. That's not the area that I particularly work in. So actually, my narrative or storytelling might be more subtle. It might be dialed down, and that's absolutely fine, because these are levers that we're playing with. These are just frameworks that we're investigating and that we're developing here. So again, I just want you to remember this. Immersive design is human design. It's designed for people, by people. It is not about the product. It's about how the people interact with it. So how are you going to apply this? I want to give you an example, another piece of example of my work. This was actually a response to a competition that was put out there by Design magazine at the end of last year with Bentley Motors. And they wanted people to respond to a brief to design the luxury retail store of the future. So the idea was that you would design a retail store for 2030 and beyond. How would we as humans want to purchase things? Now, retail stores at the moment generally aren't great. Automotive or car retail showrooms, I'm going to say are terrible, right? I don't know if anyone's tried to buy a car recently. It's not a great experience. It's really boring. You've got this big piece of metal here. You might be able to go on a test drive. Do I care? Not really. And one of the parts of this brief was around sustainability, and they really wanted to have a sustainable element. So when I looked at this brief and I thought about luxury retail stores of the future, rather than thinking small, I decided to think really big. And what I was thinking about was a lot of cities actually have these car parks, which are really quite beautiful. And they're sitting there and they're not being used. And actually a lot of them are being knocked down, a lot of buildings are being locked down, a lot of department stores are being locked down. And this is terrible for the environment, because there's so much carbon in that concrete that really we need to be reusing rather than just knocking things down. And the next thing I thought about is, a few years before, I had been offered a Rolls-Royce for the weekend. I'd done a project with them, and they said, you know what, do you want to just drive a Rolls-Royce to the weekend? Now, the only place to pick up a Rolls-Royce in London is from the showroom, which is on Grosvenor Square. Now, I don't know if any of you have been near Grosvenor Square recently, but the traffic near there, I don't want to be driving a Rolls-Royce out into there. In my mind, I'm like, I'm just going to crash it. Someone's going to crash into me. I can't be dealing with that. So when I was thinking about designing this luxury retail store of the future, I was thinking about how could we change that experience for the individual? How could we take away that fear of driving out into the street? So this is what I designed. Now this is my reimagining of one of those car parks. And what I decided to put around it was a driving track. So you could drive your Rolls Royce on a driving track around the space, and you could have projections on the walls which could put up different areas of the UK or wherever you wanted to drive in the world. Now, this is a future idea. This is not now, this is into the future, but this is something we could aspire to. Is this something you could do? This is a more interesting experience when you're buying a car. This is more fun. I'm behind the wheel. I'm experiencing it. I'm having a good time. And then in the core, I designed all these different rooms. So this was a room where people would be able to sit and they'd be able to listen to music on the same speakers that were being used in your car. So you could sit and listen to a concert, or you could do different things. You could use different materials. There was a whole showroom at the top where you had mycelium leather, and there were different labs where they were using different materials. But it was a completely different way of looking at the space. And the reason I was able to do this is because I was using that model of, like, what does a human want? What do we want? This is an immersive methodology that we're using here. Now, why immersive experience is so good at getting people to care about things? Why do we naturally find them so much more exciting than other forms of communication? The problem is that people don't remember anything. Most of you won't remember anything I've said about half an hour after walking out of here, which is sad because I put quite a lot of effort into this talk. But it's just the way that it is. We don't remember things. And we particularly don't remember marketing. We don't remember things that are just told to us, you know, things that are coming through screens. But immersive experiences are slightly different. And the reason they're different is because the way our brain is formed. So I'm not a neuroscientist, and I'm just going to lay that out there. So I'm going to do a very top line on this. But my understanding that most of the neurons in our brain are laid down by the time that we are 25, by the time we're born. So basically, when we're born, all the neurons are in our brain, and they exist there, apart from one part of our brain, the hippocampus. So the hippocampus keeps developing neural pathways as we get older. And the area in the things that are stored in the hippocampus are spatial memories and episodic memories. Now, spatial memories are where we are in space, so where we are in relation to anything else in the world, and episodic are the things that are happening to us. Now, we know when we're designing an immersive experience, we're in a space and things are happening to us, which means that neural pathways are being formed in our hippocampus, and they're novel. It's the first time you would have done that. You won't have done the things you're doing before. It's not like driving to work, and that means you remember it. It really imprints on our brains, and people remember these experiences. They will remember going to a meal in an attic in Shoreditch when you walked in and it was a Californian, walnut grove. You remember these things, which means it's easier to communicate these messages that you want, because novelty is what our brains are seeking. We really want to have novelty, and immersive experiences and immersive methodology is a really good way of communicating that. So really, when we're thinking about design, what we're thinking about, the emotions we can create. When you're looking at a story you have to tell, whatever that might be, you might be developing a new vaccine, you might have a new toilet, you might have, something else, a story you want to tell about climate change. Where are the emotions in that story? Where are the moments of change? Where are the things that people can hang on to, and how can you blow this up into a story? Now, I just want to talk a little bit about actually how we tell stories and how that might be changing going into the future. So stories have a general arc. And anybody that has studied any form of story writing, whether that be film or theatre or fiction, will recognize this. This is a general arc. Normally when people talk about this, they talk about Star Wars is a big one that everyone goes on about. So what you have is your exposition, so you have your sit-up, something terrible happens, Bambi's mother dies, awful, we've never got over it. Then you have your rising action, so all the drama, how are we going to fix this, what are we going to do next? And then we end up with our climax, and we have a falling action and a resolution. And most stories that you see that are observed through a screen follow this arc. And this arc is still important. This arc is still important to us because actually it releases dopamine in our brain, it releases oxytocin in our brain. But with these new mediums of storytelling, with this immersive storytelling, we need to have a different way of telling stories. Because this arc won't work, because people aren't just walking in one line. They're in an environment. We're in a 360 environment. There was a very, very clever woman called Stephanie Riggs who wrote a book called The End of Storytelling. And in it, she posits that actually the way that we tell stories fundamentally has to change because we're now moving into a 360 environment. She said stories are no longer linear. Stories are a sphere, and we need to be thinking about the sphere of storytelling. And that means we need to change the mediums that we're using and the way that we're thinking about the stories that we have to tell. And all of these things are in development because I said this is a new industry. While stories have been around for a long time and experience have been around for a long time, as I said, from rituals to traveling fairs, the fact that this is an industry where there's new people coming into it and we're trying to tell new stories with new technology means we need to change the way we tell our stories. I'm not going to go and do a whole workshop on how you can tell your story here, but this is an incredibly useful tool that's being developed. And this comes from the Experience book, which is an excellent book. I thoroughly recommend it for anybody who's interested in going deeper. And in this diagram, you can see the way that we could start charting stories and how we can tell our stories. And actually what you can see is there's two different components. We have our user and we have our host, which means the user, the individual who's coming, is as important as the host. You are all as important in this room as I am. Because I have to react to you. And that gets amplified when we're thinking about spaces and environments where people are playing, where people are experiencing new things and how much care and attention they might need. You think about a customer journey that they have, different steps. What are they doing? What are they thinking? What are they feeling in this moment? And you can chart all sorts of things on a chart like this. You can do a customer journey. You can do an event. You could do a birthday party. You can think, how do you want your guests to come? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? And what are you going to do about that? So thinking about that chart, this is another experience that I created. And this was at the Savoy Hotel. So this is the entrance to the Savoy Hotel. This is the turning circle outside. There's a fountain here. This is a private road. This had never been shut down. It's 126-year history, and it was for this, and I still have to apologise to black cab drivers now who don't forgive me because they can drop people at the door of the Savoy. And what happened was Bowmore Whiskey, which is a lovely whiskey, came to me and they said, we are doing a partnership with the Savoy, and we would like to create something that really draws people back. It was the end of pandemic. People hadn't been able to go out. People had been locked in their houses. The hotel was still closed. And they wanted to create something that felt really special and told their story and that people would be able to experience. So this is Bowmore Whiskey. Now, Bowmore Whiskey is aged by the sea. So up in Scotland, on an island, it's aged, and it has these amazing black rocks where the waves hit the rocks and it ages it. It's the oldest aging kind of vault in Scotland where this whiskey is aged. And what I do is what I did for this project is what I always do, which is I read everything I could about Bowmore Whiskey, and I read everything I could about the Savoy. I read its history, I went through their brand books, and I thought, the challenge with a lot of whiskies is a lot of them are quite the same. And actually, when you look at their brand books, their brand colours tend to be black, grey, and white, maybe a bit of copper, if you're lucky. And I thought, well, that's not that interesting. It's not that fun. So I went through their brand book, and what I found was these two photos. So this is a photo of the waves crashing against the black rocks. This is a photo of the inside of the vault. And this amazing teal colour just felt a little bit more interesting. So what I decided to do is I decided to create a story around these photos, which I was going to tell in this space. Now, it was a soft touch story. We weren't there to try and, really ram home the history of Bowmore or the Savoy to the people that are coming. They just want a glass of champagne and some oysters. But what we wanted to have was we wanted to have it kind of move through the space. We wanted them to have them feel it. So what we designed was this. And this environment was a restaurant that actually was extended 4 times, ran outside the front of the Savoy. And it looked like this. So that's the road that was there before. Now, these chairs, actually, I found inside the Savoy. I wanted that teal colour, and they were closing down a restaurant at the back of the Savoy, and I walked around the Savoy, and I was like, I'll have those. They'll be great for my installation. And it was an example, really, of sustainability, because we don't have to buy everything new when we're creating these experiences. We can use things that are existing. We can reuse things which are beautiful. Beautiful curved leather chairs were here. This amazing chandelier that was created by some floral artists that I worked very, very closely with, one of my partners, Tuff, was created, and it was gave the idea of those waves crashing against the rocks, and you have the cascading crystal decanters that were coming off, and then you have this bar. So this bar was created, the tagline was the art of time. It was all about aging whiskey. This is real granite in the front of this bar that I sourced. And we took an angle grinder to the front of the bar and carved gold through the front of the bar to give it a luxe feel. And the Art Deco influence was from the Savoy. It was the history of the Savoy, like the height of the beauty of the Savoy. And people came and they were so delighted with this experience. They were able to sit there after being stuck inside. And even though that narrative wasn't really forced down their throats, there was a sense that someone had cared, someone had designed, someone had created something that really mattered and had been really thought through. So who's designing these experiences? Who are these people? Are they all engineers that worked in nightclubs and then decided to set up a company, had a dream of a laundromat? Some of them. And some of them are artists, some of them are technologists, they're scientists that have amazing stories that they want to tell, and they're partnering together. And what's really interesting about this industry is how many different disciplines there are that come together. You need to have all these different types of people working together. It's cross-disciplinary. And when I think about cross-disciplinary, I actually think about the origins of university, standing here today at the Intellectual Forum. And when you think about actually, people didn't used to have a singular discipline. People actually used to learn all sorts of different subjects when you go back to the idea of German universities. And I think that actually what I want to suggest to all of you is this idea of being cross-disciplinary, of working with people you might not normally work with, reaching out, because it's when these people come together that we can create extraordinary experiences, but also tell more interesting stories. The last thing I want to talk to you today about is something that I'm particularly excited, and that is impactainment. Now, I don't normally like mashed up words. Phygital is something, ooh, whoever did that shouldn't have done that, physical, digital. But anyway, impactainment is a term which has been recently coined, and what this means is using entertainment to make an impact, to tell a story about something that matters. Now, in this sense, biodiversity, sustainability, how can we actually change people's behaviors from an experience? How can we change people's behavior using entertainment? Let's not just tell people what they have to do and hope that they do it and change their minds. Maybe if we made them feel it. Maybe if we could build a future, build a world where they could experience it, we would really be able to make a change in this world. So what we would be doing with entertainment is we'd be taking novelty and fun and we're giving it purpose. And this is a really exciting idea of using immersive experiences. We're not just selling washing machines and other things. What we're doing is we're actually changing hearts and minds and telling stories that really matter. And there are some incredible people doing this work at the moment. This experience, which is currently touring, I believe, is created by Flora and Fauna Visions. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to create an environment where you could go and you could be immersed in this garden, this fantastical garden. But rather than it being a passive experience, when you touch the walls, the garden would change. And the way that you reacted would affect the seeds that were in the space. And what you did would change how the garden grew. And maybe, just maybe, after this, you could go home and you could think about your garden or other gardens, how important it has to have a garden. And what's really interesting about this particular studio is they don't just leave it there after you leave the experience, they follow up with you. And they ask you, how can we support you with growing your garden? Can we give you seeds? Can we do something? It isn't just a one-off moment. It's something that people can grow literally from this idea of wonder and awe, of story, of design, of technology, of a desire for a better future. And so it's these coming together, it's this kind of working that we're better together, that we can create these really amazing environments, that we can all create something that's really special. Now, this was something that I was working on. It was something called Seeds of the Future, and it was the idea of that we all plant a seed now. it will be a seed for the future. And how can we use immersive experiences and immersive environments to have people walking through them? And actually thinking in cities, I'm particularly interested in urban environments. I live in central London and there just isn't enough greenery, even though London is technically a forest. I just feel like there should be more, and how can we use these experiences, and how can actually we immerse people in these future worlds that they create? And that's the thing about immersive experiences, is they are world building. We're building these better futures together. Now, has anyone here read the book Feral? Okay, well, please go and read the book Feral. It's really, really good. I read the book Feral during lockdown, and in the book Feral, George Monbiot talks about the idea of biodiversity. And actually what he talks about is our idea of biodiversity is so influenced by our current idea of how many birds there are in the sky or how many fish there are in the sea, that only the last 100 years. We really can't imagine how many more kind of animals there were in the world before we existed in it. And what we found was actually he talked about that when they excavated Trafalgar Square, they found elephant bones under Trafalgar Square. And they found real lion bones under Trafalgar Square because like hundreds of thousands of years ago, these animals actually walked across London. And I just thought how fabulous it would be, rather than just telling you that when you can't really feel it. What if you went to an experience and you could see the elephants going across London? And you could see what that felt like. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to put elephants back into London, but he did do a table where he ranked different animals and he gave them a rating depending on how well they could be reintroduced into urban environments. And actually, lynxes rated really highly. They don't really attack humans. So what I'm saying is if you see a lynx running around London, it definitely wasn't me that released it into the wild. But this is the power of immersive experiences. This is the power of immersive storytelling, is we can create these fantastical worlds. We can allow people to walk into them. We can allow people to roam around them. We can allow people to have fun with them. And we can spread messages of joy and hope about the world that we want to live in. And this is the last quote I want to leave with you. Real-world empathy, using science and narrative to imagine a real-world future in the name of the audience. Thank you very much. Yeah. Good in questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Meredith. That was absolutely brilliant. I think you can see why the Britain is Great campaign had a picture of Meredith saying entrepreneurs are great. Although it was, I think, you and Phoebe. It wasn't quite clear which one of you was great. But so we have lots of time for questions. I've got some to come in online, but are there any to start off with here? I think my team are ready. Yes, there's one just up there.
Firstly, thank you very much. In some ways, by definition, an immersive experience is very personal. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with the question of scale and getting to enough people to affect change?
Well, there's two answers to that, really. So yes, it is very hard to scale it. And actually one of the biggest challenges that people have when they're designing experiences is how they have something called throughput, which is how many people you can get through an experience at any one time. And how do you still make it personal? And what is that magic number? And many of my people that I know that are in part of different organizations, they're always testing this idea. At what point does it not become personal? At what point is it beyond that? And there is no definite answer for that. Technology is really helping. But the other thing I would say is there's also this metric around the fear of missing out. And there's been this way, so people are always looking for ROI on immersive experiences, so the return on investment, because, money. And one of the things that actually we've discovered is actually the impact for people that have heard about an experience but couldn't go to the experience is sometimes higher than the people who actually went to the experience. So this fear of missing out. So if you can think about the echo or the ripples beyond your experience and not just think of it as a localized idea. The other thing you can do is also think about when we think about the kind of lifespan beyond an experience. So you have this singular moment, and you can almost think about it like a pyramid. The analogy I like to use is if you go to a Beyonce concert and you get to meet Beyonce, then that's actually at the very, very top of that pyramid. That's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, never going to happen again. And if you're the next level down and you're in the audience and you're, again, amazing, but you could probably go and see her at the next city or something like that. And then you have people at home that are watching it through a screen, or they're watching another way, or they might be able to watch it on an immersive headset. And then there's people that might be able to watch it 6 months from then or a year from then. So thinking about immersive experiences when you want to create change isn't always about that singular moment. And these things, immersive experiences have lifespans. They live on. People talk about them. People talk about my experiences years after they've happened. So there isn't a singular argument. What I would say is the joy and the desire that they create means that people will continue speaking about them in a way they probably won't about some other mediums like an advert or something like that.
Fantastic. Any more in the room? Oh, sorry, right in the corner here. Sorry.
Thanks. It's a great talk. I was thinking, what drives the development of empathy for reality from the immersive experience? And can you have a situation where people prefer the immersive experience to the reality? What's the consequence of that?
I mean, it's interesting because I didn't really touch on the different mediums that we use. So I didn't really talk about VR or AR or headsets and I think a lot of time when people are thinking about fully immersive experiences, they often think about technology, but actually that's not all immersive experiences. I work a lot in the physical. And I think that actually it's harder to create empathy in a virtual environment than it is in a physical environment, because we are human and we like to touch things. And there was an experience that I was going to mention, but I didn't put it in, which was a VR experience I went to, which I went to at the Barbican, called Bal de Paris, which was incredible. And it was based around dance. It was this kind of spectacular moment, and you went in, you put on kind of sensors on your kind of arms and legs, and one of the problems with kind of VR experiences is like, where is the edge? You know, walking out of the experience is so disconcerting and it's not very fun. And what they'd done is they'd created a really clever environment where they had a bar around the edge, and that formed a platform that moved through this experience. But what was really fun is you went in and there was kind of maybe 10 of us, and as you put the headsets on, you had these kind of creature heads on, and it was sponsored by Chanel, and they had these banks of clothes in front of you, and you walked up and you pressed a button, you looked down, you were fully dressed in the Chanel outfit, and when I kicked up my feet, I could see the shoes under my dress, and I was like, wow, this is cool. But, you know, we struggled to stay in those experiences for too long, and even though it was really fantastical and I wanted to live in that world, after about 20 minutes you can start to feel the headset and you start feeling a little bit like, you know, and people are still investigating it. I know new hardware is coming out all the time, but I actually think the challenge is, how do you create empathy in a virtual environment? And I really genuinely don't think anybody needs to worry about everybody living in what was previously called the metaverse, which is not being talked about anymore, now has a new name. And the reason why they're struggling to sell it so much is because nobody really, really wants to spend that much time in there.
Can I pick up a question that follows on a bit from that online, from Teodora Pavkovic? That was wonderful, thank you. I'd love to know where Meredith sees AI helping us storytell and where it might hurt storytelling. Will AI bring us closer together or draw us further apart?
I mean, AI it's a small word for a big thing, right? It's like, actually, what do we mean when we say AI? So some of the images that you saw that were created there were created in Midjourney. I use Midjourney a lot for my image creation now, and it's really helped me because I'm able to communicate ideas that I maybe wouldn't been able to afford to communicate before, like be able to pay to communicate, because it's incredibly expensive to pay for renderers and, you know, people that draw things up. But I still have teams of people, creatives, that I utilize when I want to then further develop an idea, because you can't use AI to design a product. You can't actually use them to work out the dimensions of what you're doing. And, you know, in the same way that you might use, again, ChatGPT, if you're, you know, asking it a question, you can have a conversation with it, but it doesn't mean that's going to be your final thing. And so I think when you're thinking about AI, it's just a tool, you know, a tool like any other tool. You know, when Photoshop came out, everybody was like, well, wait a minute, it's not a real photo. Well, it is a real photo. It's had an enhancement. So AI is an interesting idea. Again, it's not going to replace humans, and people are creating experiences with AI. But in terms of, there was an audio experience that was created that was really interesting, where you went and you were listening to an audio cassette, and it was supposed to be somebody actually who was in a coma that you were having a conversation with, and you were going through this communication with them. But actually, they weren't able to make it in real time, so actually it was pre-recorded. So it still wasn't as advanced. So I just think AI is a tool, like any other tool. And, we all have the power to choose how we use the tools in our hands.
Can I bring in another question from online from Paul Klein from Anglia Ruskin University? What strategies have you found to be most effective in getting late adopters to change their behaviour with regard to engagement? How do you get people to actually engage?
I mean, late adopters, we always think when we're thinking about immersive experiences and how do we, get more people to come to them, these also have different levels. So when you think about immersive experiences, when I first started talking about them to kind of commercial clients in 2015, 2016, they were absolutely terrified. They thought the idea of immersive was going to be like someone's going to jump scare them out the side of a wall. And I was like, no, they won't. It's become much more of a buzzword. And now we're using immersive kind of narratives and storytellings in a way that are much more subtle. And I actually just think as people are seeking out more entertainment, you have a range of things you can choose to go to. So it doesn't have to be something which is necessarily very heavily theatrical. It can be something that's very light touch. And again, when I'm talking about using this methodology, it could be that you're using it to communicate if you're doing a gallery design or you're a museum or something, and you actually just want to think about how are people going to emotionally engage with this content in a way that isn't static and is actually going to draw them in. So I think we already live in an immersive world. Like this, everything is immersive, but it's just how do we design for it?
Next question over there.
So lots of great ideas. I'm particularly interested in your use of fun, and what it seems to connect to me is you're sort of trying to bring people almost back to their childhoods, where they just took things and played with them and just had that sense of freedom, really. But I'm wondering, when you're trying to create an immersive experience, do you want to keep people on that childhood level, or do they actually want to be experiencing in that way but still thinking sort of adult thoughts? So it's the connection then between, can it only be fun, or can you put in things that are not really part of childhood, like sustainability or many other things as well? How does that balance work?
I think it's a really interesting point. I mean, not everything is fun. I would always try to design for positivity. So while you can create experiences which might be scary or might kind of terrify this idea of, something might be apocalyptic, that's not my style, because I feel that positivity is a better way of communicating. Hope is, where I like to sit on the line of things. But I do think that when you're thinking about more complicated ideas, you can still use immersive experiences. So actually, I put together a consortium to design the UK Pavilion for Expo 2025. Came second. But it was a really interesting process because we got from the government, the brief was 350 pages of government policy. And they were like, can you create a building which has multiple rooms and you can't use any language because it's completely international? And can you tell everybody about how great the UK is at biomedical science using space? And we were like, sure, cool, let's do that. And we did. We actually marked exactly the same on narrative and customer journey and pavilion design. And it was a really interesting process to unpick these really complicated ideas, these really complicated stories, and think about how do we engage people. And so you have fun and then you have engagement. And engagement is about, do I care? Is this interesting to me? And at some point you also have to think, people are thinking, what do I get out of this? Because actually experience is about buying people's time. And time is precious. We all only have a limited amount of time. And I believe in designing things which honors people's time. I try and respect it. So I'm not sure if that answers. So yes, you can make more complicated things. People are doing some really, really incredible work around mental health. They're doing some really, really incredible work about, there's some companies that are working on impactainment, and they're working with scientists to measure our brainwaves while they're moving through these experiences, and how do they feel about it afterwards. So these things aren't just happening in one space, they're being followed up in quite a serious way.
There's a question from Roy Layton online who says, wonderful stuff, thank you. Given the still dominant and excessive focus on the analytical and measurable in our educational systems, we have a challenge. He quotes Dr. Ian McGilchrist in The Master in His Emissary and work on the divided brain, says our excessive focus on the rational and analytical, measurable and graspable has massively diminished our creativity, innovation and capacity for imagination, risk and collaboration. I'm tempted to just say discuss, but What are your thoughts on how schools and universities can generate and educate the facilitators and innovators for this growing sector?
Well, you know, play is incredibly important. Art is incredibly important. Fund the arts, fund culture, because as you can see, these are things that we need. You know, if we don't have arts and culture and play and joy and that from childhood, actually, it is really difficult, and they are so important. Like, this industry is absolutely, you know, it's balanced so completely between the arts and the sciences, which is why I personally love it so much. I don't have an answer for the school system, unfortunately. I wish I did. My brothers and sisters both work with young people. One of them runs or is kind of a fundraiser for Oxfordshire Youth in Oxford, and really works with trying to bring joy and play back into young people's life. And my brother works with the arts and creating art rooms in schools and allowing children to have spaces to play and to be creative. And what I would say is these things are important in equal measure.
Do wave in the room and I'll try to fit people in. There's one at the front there and then over there. I've got lots queuing up online. So
you mentioned the importance of having interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary teams. So the idea of interdisciplinary is that you have people from different domains and they cooperate where the domains intersect. So now a few years ago at MIT Media Labs came up with the concept of anti-disciplinary, which means, you're not restricted by a boundary. Now, it struck me that a lot of what you do is anti-disciplinary. So now, what do you think the implications are for the future? Should we still be thinking in terms of multidisciplinary?
I mean, when we think about specialization, of course, there's certain people, the longer you study something, the more you learn it, the more, the further you get along. And if what you really, really love is, coding, then code to your heart's content and go and become the best coder in the world. And that's fantastic. But then when I need a coder, I want to go and find that coder and I want to be able to work with them. And one of the challenges of interdisciplinary work is, number one, how do you find each other? And the other thing is, how do you communicate with each other? Because actually there's different language that's being used in different disciplines. And I might be using, even between theatre, I have a friend of mine who talks a lot about narrative beats, and it took me a while to work out what she was talking about. And when I got it, but essentially it's these touch points of these stories that you're going along. And you're having to use, if you have many different disciplines that are working together, you might have a completely different language that you're using. So how do you have somebody that can be the glue in between those and actually kind of cross-communicate between people, and who's brave enough to put teams together? So I don't think there is any one answer, but what I would say is I believe the UK is uniquely set up for collaborative work because we do have such a great cultural kind of community here. It's such a big industry for the UK. And in fact, in the Department of International Trade, Department of Business and Trade now, I believe it's been renamed, there is actually an experience economy division that was set up by somebody Richard Parry, who is incredible, who read the experience economy book and realized that the UK could export their experiences. And so that in itself is really forward thinking as far as I'm concerned. I think that's brilliant that actually even the government is looking at this. And so I think, to answer your question, yes, we should have more of it. And yes, people should keep doing the things that they really love doing.
But just before we bring in the question there, because there's one that came in online which is related, what disciplines should be working together that aren't? Is there anybody missing from the mix at the moment?
Well, there could be more money. It would be useful. So more funding would be great for everybody, because at the moment a lot of immersive experience design falls between different elements. It's not theatre, so there'll be a pot of money for theatre, and there'll be a pot of money if you want to be an artist and put on a gallery thing, and if you're a scientist, you can go off and there's a different pot of money, but there's no pots of money for us because it doesn't really fit in any one bracket and people don't really know what to do with it. That would be great. I think the other thing, I mean, apart from that, no, because everybody who wants to do it's kind of starting to find it, and there's amazing networks. So there's the Immersive Experience Network that's run by my friend Sheena that I mentioned along with some other people. There's a World Experience Organization run by somebody called James Wallman, bringing experience designers from all over the world, and there's people from Disney and Apple and Google. And in fact, I was at a college in Poland last year. We went there and went to the College of Extraordinary Experiences, and there was 125 experience designers from around the world, and everybody from people that were dancers and performers right through to people from Google and Apple, and there was professors from Utah who were thinking about experience in the sense of religion, and all these different people were coming together, and we were sitting around, and for a week we wore robes. It was a little bit Harry Potter. It was a fully immersive, and we had a samurai there who was a 16th generation samurai ninja. He was the last one in his family, and so what he wants to do is travel the world and tell people about his craft and teach people. We learned how to use samurai swords, and I guess this is my way of saying there's a lot of people that are interested in doing it, and more people should get involved because it is fun and it is important.
So more ninjas is the main
More
area.
ninjas.
I've got. I'll do the closer question first, and there's one in the middle, yes, and then I'll do the other two there.
Oh, first of all, Meredith, I just want to say I think it's marvellous, and I think you look great in your outfit. It's really fun. And this, to me, is amazing because I've got an art and science background, and I think in a world now where adults really are kind of burdened by all the stuff going on, this is really therapeutic because it's helping people to be like a child, be childlike. And someone like myself who's neurodivergent, everything is amplified. And when you get older, you get told, contain it. But this is amazing. And I wanted to ask also, animals are very healing. And have you ever thought about bringing animals into it at all? Bit random.
Okay, well, animals, I normally have my dog with me. Unfortunately, they're not allowed in Cambridge. We've had a long conversation about this. Byron had a bear, and that was it. No more animals after that. But yes, animals are fantastic. I have had animals. Obviously, you need to be very careful of their welfare and elements like that. But, immersive experiences could be that you go and you visit spaces. So the Eden Project, run by the incredible Sir Tim Schmidt, who is a friend of mine, they build these big biodomes, and you could go down there and you could interact with kind of wildlife on a small level there. So animals are fantastic, and you can utilize whether it's kind of virtual animals or whether it's real animals. Again, it's all just about building these worlds. And so if it's something that you want to see, I'm sure you can build it, or you can find people that can build it for you. So, yeah.
I'm sorry we couldn't bring Phoebe in. There was a special exemption for a performing chihuahua at one point. But can I go to the one behind you there? Yes.
Hi, thanks so much. I was just wondering, some of your projects were kind of more non-profit, impact, sustainability based, and then some are more for-profit. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, as this kind of world develops, how do you see those two worlds being similar in how they create the experience? How do they diverge? There's a lot of movement in museums becoming more immersive, but then there's also a lot of products who want to get involved in brands. So I was just wondering how you feel those two worlds might either work together or spread apart, so to speak.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So actually, the way the kind of the commercial element or bringing brands in has actually, the perception of it's changed quite a lot over the first few years. So when I created Keeping Up with the Joneses, which was in 2016, it was sponsored by Whirlpool, and I had their logo on the window. And actually, I got some kickback from people that were Time Out readers who had said that they resented the fact they paid £12.50 to come down, despite the fact they got 3 cocktails and 2 things to eat. They thought it was too much because it was sponsored by Whirlpool, and that was unacceptable. And I was like, the price of your ticket does not cover the cost of this event. And again, when I created the world's first avocado-only restaurant where every dish had avocado in it at the very beginning of the avocado craze, and had international press. And the cost for me, for each person walking through the door, was £150 a head, and I charged £55 a head for the brunch. And even then, it was at kind of the top end of what you could charge. So really, you need to be thinking, where else am I going to get money to run this thing, which I think is interesting? Well, I went to brands, and there's still some people, certainly in the in the community today who are purists and think, well, it's art and you shouldn't be getting brand money. And I guess that's the age-old question, is like, how are these things funded? I would say that, you know, you're more likely to be able to, you can either prove something is incredibly commercial. So if you have something like the Crystal Maze, which is using existing intellectual property, it's much more easy to get funding because people understand what it is. If you can get money from Disney or Warner Brothers to build something, and lots of these film companies are trying to kind of monetize their IP, or if you have something which is more of kind of social good, you might be able to access a different pot of money. And so as creators, we're always trying to dance that fine line between, you know, where does the money come from and what can we build with it? I am driven, you know, my desire is to create things that make change and have purpose and build these amazing things. But, you know, at the end of the day, you also have to build things, and you need. So I hope that what we can do is we can actually show, you know, a future where we can continue to build more interesting things for, you know, the common good. I feel like, again, in a way, that's the idea of these sectors being separated, right? Why is this sector, why is the charity sector so separate from the commercial sector? Why couldn't that come together a little bit better? There's an example. So there you go. Answer that question. Because, again, maybe they could work together a bit more closely, which would be great.
Just before we go to the front row there, a question from Liz, or at least Liz's iPad, it says, I love the idea of anything that builds empathy and expands our sense of lived experience. Do you have thoughts on how this could be utilised in charitable and educational settings, such as engaging philanthropists, to increase insight on the impact of war, living in poverty, or being a refugee?
Yes, there are some amazing people doing work around this space. Certainly, what I would say is the people that are working this space are people that have kind of the right to speak on it and actually have either a lived experience or kind of a professionals within that field. And so designing experiences with empathy and with, you know, there needs to be a lot of care and attention when you're creating those types of experiences. And there are definitely, certainly in America, there seems to be more of a kind of lean in to creating experiences that can communicate those messages. And, you know, one of the real challenges, I think, from my understanding, is for when we're talking about situations where people might have experienced trauma, is often a lot of the times we're asking people to relive that trauma over and over again when we speak to them about it. And maybe we could utilize something like this to actually kind of create a new way of communicating when we weren't relying so heavily on an individual to have to relive that moment over and over again to try and get funding to solve the problem, because why should they have to have that burden on their back? And I wonder whether there is a way of utilizing this way of communicating to try and create a different message which also resonates and unlocks that funding for people.
At the front here.
Thanks. Another question from the not-for-profit industry over here. I think that we're tackling with some really big issues globally and then also locally. And from my background, that's transport, and we have consultations and you just get dry technical drawings and people are asked to, well, what do you think of this? And I feel we're really missing the selling the vision. And I think that people are under so much pressure and we're asking them to look at a drawing and somehow imagine a different future. And the people involved in this space saying there is a different future, we don't have that kind of budget. So I guess my question is, what can we learn from the immersive experience economy that we can apply to more traditional and affordable communication strategies to help people, you know, start to imagine how things might be a little bit different?
Yeah, I think it's really a really good point. So a lot of things I've shown you, while some of them were kind of not huge budget, then it kind of, as my work has progressed, I've worked with larger and larger budgets, but actually some amazing work is being done on very, very little. And I always try and think about what is the minimum viable product for an experience, and actually what is the smallest thing you can do. And I've seen incredible experiences that have been created in shipping containers or storage units. And what they're doing is they're trying to create a narrative on something which isn't a lot of money. And I think this is where community is really, really important. And actually thinking about, when you're thinking about transport and, you know, let's say fewer cars in the city centre, possibly, what you might be thinking about is actually what you want to be selling is not the idea of fewer cars, but what's the benefit of fewer cars. And so I went to an amazing thing at Somerset House, which was done by Climart, which is an organisation which uses art around climate to measure how art can change our perception of climate. And what they had created was these biodomes, these small biodomes in Somerset House, and you walked through 5 of them, and they replicated different air pollution levels, so from Delhi to London to different places, and you walked through. Now, while they weren't toxic to you, they kind of created a sense of kind of claustrophobia as you got further along. And so what I would say is there might be somebody who's doing work around what you're doing out there if you kind of use the Google and go out there, and there might be some researchers that are looking actually what is the benefit to people for having fewer cars in this, you know, in this environment? Is it cleaner air? Is it more space? And how can we create a small replica of that so they might be able to have a mini experience of that, and you have a contrast? So it be that you just create a small element of that, and I'm sure that people that have created these experiences before would be happy to share their technology with you, because actually the immersive experience economy, we're a very open bunch. We really want to talk about the work that we're doing. And so while I completely understand it's difficult when you don't have resources, and certainly when you don't have time, there's people out there that are doing interesting things. But again, it's going back to that, the methodology is always like putting yourself in the idea of the person of the future, and what is the impact you're selling them, rather than the report, because it's so hard to imagine, isn't it? Like, it's, you know, you kind of go, great, but it doesn't have that change. And I think that's something, you know, across the world, people are talking about these things, and there's people working on it. So wherever possible, try and not spend money on reports once you have them, and try and just see if you can divert a little bit of that budget to people, and get people involved and get the community involved, and see what they do. But there's, again, placemaking is a really interesting one. Sorry, I'm kind of diverging here, but placemaking is a really interesting one, because often when you have to bring communities in, when you're building a new place or changing the use case of a place, you actually have to bring the community along with you. And there's examples at the NLA, they've got the New London architecture, which has all these amazing resources of organisations where they've used ideas of kind of placemaking experience to communicate the vision of how that location will be in the future for that community, and got them involved. So while it's not my speciality, there's incredible work that's going on out there. So definitely look it up.
We're beginning to run out of time, but I'll try and fit in the last few questions as much as I can. And there was one over there.
Thank you so much. What was the very first experience that you designed?
The tipping point for me was actually something called Nordic Yule Fest, which I didn't include. So I was creating a Christmas party for a tech company, and I was looking for a location for this event to happen. And I had proposed 3 different concepts to them, and they came back and they said they really liked the Nordic one. And it was 2014. Funnily enough, if you think back then, it was the beginning of the Nordic trend, and people weren't really using Nordic design. And I went and I found an attic, a different attic. Attics are good, they're available. So I found an attic, which was in East London, wasn't too expensive. And the bit where it changed for me was when I went, I could open this for 1 day, or I could open this for 21 days. Really foolish, because 21 days is significantly longer than 1 day if you're running something. But what happened then was, because I'd signed up for 21 days, I had to make it work, and I had to sell it to 21 people. And one of the people I sold it to was Working Title Films. And they came in and they put down a deposit on their Christmas party, and said, we absolutely cannot do our Christmas party in here, and you're going to have to give us your deposit back, because this is just an attic and there's nothing in here. And I said, I promise you there'll be things in here. And what I did was I built an immersive forest, love a tree, into this attic, and I had Scandinavian nymphs coming down from the table, stealing food off people's tables, and I hired a taxidermy bear that was 125 years old, and I called up Finlandia Vodka, and I said, I'm doing this thing, it's called Nordic Yule Fest, it's going to be a huge success, give me some of your money. And they did. They gave me £15,000 for the bear, and I got a PR agent, and it ended up in global press. It was in the BBC and the Guardian and things like that, because it was novel and it was new and nobody else was doing something like that. So it also almost killed me, because it was such a big endeavour and I really didn't know what I was doing. But I've since learned. So that was my first experience, and I had amazing people that came on that journey with me who are still with me now. But it really showed me the power of creating a world and how you could really, like, Working Title came and they said it was the best Christmas party they'd ever had, and invited us to their head office and gave us a private screening to say thank you. And the owners of Working Title Films, who have created some of the best films in the world, sat there and they looked up at these imps coming down and they went, we don't know what's going on, but we love it. So that's another example of how when you don't have any money, you just have a dream, you can kind of make it happen.
I think that's probably a wonderful place to leave things, Meredith. So that was absolutely great. Thank you so, so much. Covering so many different things.
Thank you.